Okay, we're going to review the nitrogen cycle. First question, what do humans do to create an imbalance within the nitrogen cycle? One thing that we do is we use excess amounts of fertilizers, whether it be in your yard for a nice green grass or on big farm fields. They use a lot of manure and fertilizers for their crops, and that runoff goes down and it gets into the waterways. You can see this picture here. It's pretty disgusting. That manure ends up in the water system, and that causes some problems for the water cycle. Okay, what human-related issues are causing the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico? It's very similar to the previous problem. Fertilizers and manure runoff from farms. All that runoff goes into the rivers, and all those rivers drain into the Mississippi River, and the Mississippi River comes out right here in the Gulf of Mexico. So it's pretty obvious what's causing that problem. It's all that excess nitrogen that's running off into the Gulf of Mexico. Why is the Gulf of Mexico declared one of the largest dead zones in the United States? Well, what causes it to be called a dead zone is because it doesn't have any oxygen. It does have some oxygen, but it doesn't have enough oxygen in the water to sustain fish life. And as you saw in that video and the article that we gave you the other day, that causes some problems for fish and for shrimp and other animals that need to use that oxygen in the water. So this process, excess nitrogen being drained into the Gulf of Mexico, what that does is it causes excess algae growth. Okay, now you'd think, because plants love nitrogen. That's why we put nitrogen on our yards, to make it nice and green. But when that algae, that excess plant life, when that dies, the bacteria eat up the algae. And in that process of the bacteria eating up the algae, they use up oxygen. And so they're kind of sucking out the oxygen out of the water, and it makes it a very poor place for fish to survive. Okay, list something from each sphere that has nitrogen. Well, in the geosphere, there's nitrogen in the soil. Plants use the nitrogen in the soil to get that source of nitrogen. In the atmosphere is made mostly of nitrogen gas. The problem is we can't use it, and plants can't use it. It's got to be converted by bacteria to usable forms. So even though there is a lot of nitrogen in the air, it's just not a usable form. In the biosphere, DNA in plants and animals have nitrogen. In the hydrosphere, lakes and rivers also have nitrogen. Okay, and then it also says to circle the sphere with the largest amount of nitrogen. Most of the nitrogen is in the atmosphere, but like I said, you cannot use it. It's got to be converted by bacteria to a usable form for humans and plants. When too much nitrogen is run off into lakes, the result is called eutrophication. Eutrophication means an excess amount of nitrogen, which leads to excess amount of plant growth. And as you can see here, there's way too much nitrogen, causing way too much algae, and it causes a pretty disgusting place to want to swim. This would not be a good place for fish, because the result is going to be a lack of oxygen in the water, and the fish won't be able to survive there. Circle the best answers. Eutrophication occurs when higher levels of nitrogen create lower levels of oxygen. A cause of this would be, we've talked about this before, fertilizers and manure runoff from farms. Nitrogen in the atmosphere is not used by humans or plants. What is responsible for changing it into useful forms that plants can use? That would be bacteria. If you remember back to the notes, we called bacteria the BFF of nitrogen. That's because it makes it into a usable form that we can use and plants can use. Okay? That usable form is called nitrates or NO3. As farming and human population have increased, the total amount of nitrogen on Earth has stayed the same. A lot of people might be tempted to put increased, but that is not the correct answer. The correct answer is that it has stayed the same. Okay, the reason is because the Earth is a closed system. The amount of nitrogen doesn't change. Humans affect which sphere the nitrogen is in. So we take nitrogen from the atmosphere and we convert it into things like fertilizers. Okay, so the amount of nitrogen doesn't change. It's just we're changing what form it's in the different spheres. Humans breathe in 90% of the nitrogen they need for their bodies. That is false. We cannot use that form of nitrogen that's in the atmosphere, nitrogen gas. We can't use that. We need bacteria to convert it into a useful form. So nitrogen can be obtained by humans when eating foods that contain nitrogen. And we get that because the plants can soak up that nitrogen in their roots, and then we eat the plants, or we eat the cows that ate the plants, and we get our source of nitrogen from that. Humans need nitrogen because, well, we need it to make DNA in our cells. We need it for protein for our muscles and our skin and our hair. So it's definitely something that humans need and plants need to survive.